We have spent a lot of time lately discussing a prospective third baseman for the New York Mets in Carlos Correa, but on today's show, we are instead going to talk about one of the best third base prospects in all of baseball, and that is Brett Baty. Could Brett Baty be the Mets starting third baseman or left fielder next year? I'll go through his fit on the 2023 Mets, and also, is he the best prospect the Mets have had since David Wright? All of that and more on today's edition of Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. First off, wish all of you a very happy new year. I think it's going to be a great year for the New York Mets, and I just want to thank you for having subscribed to this channel. We're right around 5,000 subs on YouTube. For the podcast audience, I can't thank you enough for your long support. We hit 1 million downloads in 2022. An amazing total. I could not believe that. So just wanted to let you all know how much I appreciate you for finding this content and for your support over the past year and the years prior for the longtime listeners. Now, getting into the meat of today's show, Brett Baty. This is a player that could really move the needle for the Mets next season, and I don't think that Carlos Correa's addition really impacts what he can do to the Mets. It just impacts where they're going to play him, because I think this is the type of player that is going to find at-bats. And so we're going to focus early on in this show with just that, the bat, before we get into sort of his role next season. And for context on just how good of a prospect Brett Baty is, I pulled up some career minor league numbers that I think some of you might find interesting. This is career / line in the minor leagues. Brett Baty, a 289 hitter, 390 on base, 493 slugging, and 883 OPS. David Wright, 287 hitter, 385 on base, 463 slugging, and 848 OPS. Now, Brett Baty has tapped into a little more pop than Wright did across a shorter minor league career. So for Baty, you're talking about 237 games, 38 home runs. For Wright, it was 48 home runs spread out across 424 games in the minors. Then again, that is also including a lot of rehab games, right, in the later stages of career. So if you kind of remove that, David Wright's numbers are probably watered down. This honestly is just something that hit me right now as I'm going through my notes. So I was like, wait a minute. I didn't factor those in. I went to Baseball Reference, pulled the career stats. So, granted, that certainly impacts Wright. But, again, if you're looking at the comparison of these two prospects, here's a better way to look at it. In the final 91 games before making his debut in 2004, split between AA and AAA, David Wright hit 35 doubles and had 18 home runs. Brett Baty just completed a season where he primarily spent it in AA, but did make it up to triple before getting promoted to the big leagues. He hit 19 home runs, 22 doubles, and that's in 95 games last season. Now, for David Wright in 2004, absolutely mashed, hit 341, 441 on base, 605 slugging, and OPS over 1,000. He was a better defender at third base than Brett Baty, a better athlete overall. I'm not saying that Baty is the next David Wright. They're completely different players. But what I am saying is, looking at a franchise's history since 2004, when David Wright made his debut, outside of what you're maybe projecting with Francisco Alvarez, but he still quite hasn't put it all together the way that Baty just did, going from AA to AAA, and just his overall season was better this year. I mean, Baty's the best prospect we've seen in nearly 20 years for the New York Mets. And you look at his season last year leading into his big league debut, and there was 6 games in AAA, but I'm throwing them out because it was a small sample size. He did hit 364, but he got called into action due to injury for the Mets when Louis Guillorme went down. Looking at what he did in 89 games in Double-A, Brett Baty hit .312 with a .406 on base, a .544 slugging. Not quite an OPS over 1,000, but you'll take, what is that, .950? And then you look at the weighted runs created plus. This is a stat that really is kind of our best metric right now to just measure a hitter's value, because you take it based on a league average of 100, and it tells you how much better that hitter is based on the league average. Brett Baty, compared to his contemporaries in the Double-A Eastern League, he had a 160 WRC plus that led the league. You know the second best WRC plus in that league he played in. You have two guys. Okay, you have Quincy Neaporte and George Valera at 129. So a WRC plus 31% better. So those guys are 29% better than your league average hitter in the Eastern League. Baty, 60% better and 31% better than them. Unbelievable stats this season. He put it all together offensively in that bat, whether it's in left field, if it's at third base, if he's a DH, it's going to translate at the next level. And really, if you want to know the big reason for this huge breakout for Brett Baty, it is cutting the ground ball rate, because this is a guy that always had high exit velos. The power is always there, but he was drilling balls into the ground. In 2021, he spent 40 games in Double-A. He had a ground ball rate at 61.2%. Look at what he did this year in Double-A. He cut that by nearly 20. Ground ball rate at 42.6%. His line drives went from 14.6% in those 40 games in Double-A the season prior to 26.6% of the time. His fly ball rate went from 24.3% to 30.8%, so that allowed him to hit more home runs. Altogether, if you are getting the ball in the air and hitting the crap out of it, you're going to get good results. Now, what can really explain that change, though? How was he able to fix that issue in his swing, hitting the ball on the ground? I'm going to discuss that in the next segment. First, though, today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline is your number one source for all of your sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from football to basketball to soccer and esports. They've got it all at betonline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, you can find those at BetOnline as well. BetOnline is always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix before the season. I bet on the Giants to make the playoffs. Guess what? The New York Giants are in the playoffs. It's just that easy. As we get ready for the baseball season, check out the odds for the NL pennant, for winning the World Series. Eventually, maybe there's Rookie of the Year odds for Brett Baty. You can find all of that at BetOnline. All you have to do is go to the website or their mobile device to find where all the trends in the action lie. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. Now, as I said in the previous segment, a big reason for Brett Baty's success this season was getting the ball in the air. That was the biggest concern, the biggest hole in his swing was that high ground ball rate, and he fixed it this year, and that led to a breakout where he was the best hitter in that league in Double-A and was able to get promoted and hit a home run on his first swing in the big leagues. Well, Aram Layton is an unbelievable prospect analyst. He does our top 100s at justbaseball.com, and he has been very high on Brett Baty for a long time. He had him ranked in the top 20 all the way back on September 16, 2021, when he came out with his end of the season update. And I thought it would be fun to look back and see what Aram said then and what changed in a year. So this was his scouting report on Brett Baty basically going into last season at the end of 2021. He said, very loose and relaxed setup that features a wide base in which he holds the majority of his weight on a coiled back hip. The swing is still a little raw because Baty is inconsistent in regards to his lower half weight transfer. He has a tendency to lose the power in his lower half when he doesn't load correctly. With that being said, Baty features both quickness and bat speed, with the latter being close to elite once he's fully developed. Baty's loudest tool is his raw power to all parts of the field, thanks to his immense combination of strength and bat speed. The power that he flashes to the opposite field is truly unique because of his ability to hit home runs to left field that even right-handed hitters have trouble reaching. He says there's some swing and mix in his profile. However, that could be due to his inconsistent swing mechanics that also produce more ground balls than a player like Baty should be hitting. Baty's swing mechanics hint at untapped upside in his offensive profile once he shores them up. His advanced approach and physical tools could blend into a middle-of-the-order run producer at the highest level. Now, all of that information tells you there was something with his load transfer. It was getting his legs and his upper half in sync, so everything is in one motion, and that sweet swing can really come through, and you can tap into all of your power and lift the ball, hit some more home runs, shoots the gaps with line drives, and become a just dominant force offensively, and he did that. And the other part of that is talking about his advanced approach. The walk and the strikeout rates have been very consistent since 2021. He's going to walk around 11-12% of the time and strike out maybe just shy of 25% of the time, which you take when it comes to a player with this type of power. So now we fast forward, right? We look at where he is a full year later. And when it comes to the top 20, he's around the same. He's at 19, so he moved up one spot. But holding your place in the top 20 when you are a prospect and there's so much talent in baseball, that is an accomplishment in of itself. Now we look at Arum's adjusted scouting report after what we saw this season. He says, some of the easier power you see in the minors, Baty requires little movement to get into his plus raw power. It was never really a matter of hitting the ball hard for Baty, who produced impressive exit velocity since entering pro ball, though high ground ball rates impeded his ability to consistently slug. An inconsistent lower half led to an extremely high ground ball rate last season, limiting him to 13 home runs in 116 games played between high A and double A. Baty made some small tweaks to sync up his upper body and his lower half, which slashed his ground ball rate. His swing is smooth, his barrel stays in the zone for a long time, helping him use the entire field well. The left-handed hitter has shown plenty of comfort shooting the ball the other way when he is behind in the count, but also has no problem leaving the yard to left field, launching 8 opposite field home runs this past season. He also talks about him being more comfortable against lefties with a respectable 781 OPS against them last season. Talks about him being quick to the ball, repeating his movements well, helping him crush fastballs to an OPS over 1,000 in the minors last year. A well-rounded hitter, Arum says that he could slug 30 home runs with a good enough approach to get on base at an above-average clip. So if you're discussing a hitter that can get on base at a 380 clip in the big leagues and hit 30 bombs, that's a really, really good player, right? He also broke down the defense a little bit. We'll get to that in the next segment. But overall, what he says is by minimizing the defensive concern at third base, driving the ball in the air more with consistency and authority, Baty is looking like one of baseball's safer prospects while still maintaining all-star upside. He closes it by saying the Mets likely have their third baseman for 2023 and beyond in Baty. Now, because of Carlos Correa, he might not be a third baseman anymore, but everything he discusses about the bat there will hold up regardless of where you play him. And so if you're, again, discussing a player that can walk over 10% of the time and has a really good approach at the dish, who is no longer pounding the ball into the ground, who has really found his swing and is repeating it well, a guy that hit a home run on the first pitch he saw, I just think the potential is endless. And when you look at all the Mets prospects going into this season, I have the least questions about Brett Baty. Francisco Alvarez, there's some holes in his swing. You know, you can hit him high in the zone with fastballs, and he's still struggling to catch up a little bit. He can iron that out. I think it'll take a little bit of time, but he'll get there. And the defense is a whole nother ball game when you're discussing a 20-year-old catching Max Scherzer and Justin Verlander. I still think Alvarez is great. I still believe he's the best prospect in the Mets system, but Baty is not that far off, and because he's going to be either playing third base where he's improved or left field, which is maybe outside of first base, you know, the least taxing defensive position in baseball, next to Brandon Nimmo and Starling Marte potentially, and also being able to get some at-bats at DH, I really don't think that matters. If you're looking for some left-handed power on the Mets, you know, we discussed Michael Conforto throughout this offseason, just trying to get that lefty pop somewhere. Brett Baty's the answer. I mean, I'm almost more confident in Brett Baty tapping into power than Daniel Vogelbach to a certain extent. Okay, and the difference is he's a better athlete. So if you're even just looking at a DH option by the end of the season, would it shock anyone? Let's just say the entire starting group is having a great season. You have Correa, You have Canna, and he's playing well. Marte and Nimmo are healthy, and they're playing well. Would it be that stunning to think that Brett Baty could edge out Daniel Vogelbach? I think considering the fact that he walks at a really good clip too, look, Brett Baty is going to be a problem for pitchers next season, and I can't wait to see it. Now, really, the question becomes, where will he be playing? And, of course, we're going to discuss that in just a minute. First, though, today's episode is brought to you by Built Bar. We just got through the holidays. I know personally I need to drop a little bit of weight, and I always know the place I have to go. I got to stop snacking on those Christmas cookies and all of those treats from the holidays and get back to eating healthier with Built Bar. You got to try them, because what makes Built Bar so good is that they're covered in 100% real chocolate. They got unbelievable flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, coconut almond, so many, and all these bars, they basically taste like candy bars while maintaining amazing macros. What's even better, they're healthy, right? 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, whopping 17 grams of protein. This is what you want if it's after a workout, if it's for breakfast, getting your day started right, if it's dessert at the end of the day. And now you don't even need to wait around to get a box, because for years we've been saying on this show and other shows on the Locked On Podcast Network that you got to go to Built.com to order your Built Bars. But now you can actually go to your local Walmart or Sam's Club. That's right. Just head to your nearest Walmart today, walk to the pharmacy section, grab yourself a box of Built Bars. You can pick up a 4-bar box of cookies and cream, the double chocolate, or the coconut puffs. If you're close to a Sam's Club, run in, grab a 13-bar box with their hit flavors like brownie batter and churro. You can thank me later. Try Built Bar today. So where does Brett Baty fit on the 2023 New York Mets? Well, Carlos Correa is going to play a big part in that as I record this show at 10:11 on Sunday. No news. And honestly, as I discussed on a podcast last week, no news could be good news here. Because if there was another team at this point, you would think that there'd be some reports trying to drum up interest, trying to put some pressure on the Mets from the Boras side of it. Seems like these sides are amicably working towards an extremely complicated contract that's going to have to get approved from the MLB and the MLBPA before it can get finalized. So I have no idea how long it's going to take. But assuming Correa is a Met, well, where's Brett Baty going to play? As I already alluded to, left field. He's looked pretty good out there in some limited action in the minor leagues. He would probably get a ton of reps in spring training, and you just see. And I think Brett Baty, of all the prospects on the Mets, it's either him or Mark Vientos that has kind of the most direct line to competing for a job in spring training. Because even though Alvarez is great, by signing Omar Narvaez, by having Nido in place, I really think the Mets are going to focus on developing him properly. And that's honestly the best thing for him. As great as it was to see him at the end of the season, that was a do or die, try to just help your team get to a World Series as best as possible. You know what? If Brett Baty wasn't hurt, you probably never see Alvarez. There's a good chance you don't. So we'll see what Alvarez's future holds here, but I think you're looking at the starting catcher in Syracuse where he can get some time to develop behind the dish and hopefully be able to, if all things work out, become your starting catcher by the end of the season, able to handle that pitching staff, or at least an elite DH option. So that's a topic for another day. When it comes to Baty or the other prospects, Vientos right now, until they get rid of Darren Ruff, he's a little bit blocked on this roster. He doesn't have a true position. And when you have Daniel Vogelbach, it's just tough to carry two of those guys with a 26-man roster. So I think he'll get a lot of run in spring training, and he could have hit his way onto the roster, that is for sure, but I don't think that's guaranteed. Brett Baty's in a similar position. If he goes out and has a terrible spring, no problem. He's your starting left fielder, most likely in Syracuse, and he'll get to the point where he earns another promotion back. But if he's great in spring training, and you're looking at your options to fill out a team here, there's going to be, some thought about putting him on the roster and finding time for him. Whether that is, as the backup third baseman to Correa, who's also kind of splitting time with Canna and left, or whether the Mets kind of pull a move that none of us are seeing and traded Daniel Vogelbach and just completely give the keys to DH to their prospects, which is a move the Mets can employ this season if they want to. I think that one way or another, there's probably, I'd say conservatively, 350, 400 plate appearances for Brett Baty this year on the New York Mets. That's just my opinion. Some might say it's way less than that, but I just think he's going to hit his way into some playing time one way or the other. Now, obviously, if Correa falls through, well, now you're really counting on Brett Baty significantly. I think that is kind of the benefit of that signing, right? Is to take the pressure off and put your prospects in the best position to succeed, where the weight of the world's not on their shoulders when they debut. And if Brett Baty is a guy that's starting 2 games in left, 2 games at DH a week, while maybe getting some pinch hitting opportunities at the end of games, I mean, that's a pretty kind of laid back scenario to jump into, and maybe he can eventually grow into a bigger and bigger role. So I really like this prospect. And I just think that if you are trying to project the 2023 Mets this season, if you're not factoring in Brett Baty, you're overlooking him, because he just might be the best prospect this franchise has had since David Wright. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit that subscribe button. And also, thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Now, for your second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today, hosted by Peter Bukowski. Locked On Sports Today is where you want to go to stay up to date with everything going on around sports. The NFL playoff picture is a lot clearer, so I'm sure you can get some great stuff from Peter on that. You can follow Locked On Sports Today on the Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get podcasts.